In the vast expanse of the Pacific in early 1943, a quiet truth lingered beneath the roar of engines and the clash of island campaigns. Not all military units officially existed. Among them were the temporary reconnaissance detachments assembled under the OSS and the U.S. Army Air Forces, small teams of 4 to 6 men who operated without fanfare, paperwork, or the protective cloak of regular unit designation. Their missions were designed to be invisible. Their movements were rarely logged. And for several teams, their disappearance left only a faint paper trail, one that historians would spend decades trying to piece together. The first of these shadow units was deployed to the Solomon Islands during the New Georgia campaign. While the broader operation commanded headlines and strategic briefings, this particular OSS maritime unit, composed of 2 naval scouts, a cartographer and a radio operator, faced its own quiet battle. Tasked with identifying hidden Japanese artillery batteries along the coast, their mission was pivotal to the success of the upcoming Allied landings. Yet the very nature of their work required them to move through terrain the U.S. Marines had not yet secured: mangrove thickets, concealed inlets, and narrow channels watched by enemy spotters. The struggle became evident from the beginning. Weather in the Solomons was unpredictable, the air thick with humidity and the constant threat of tropical storms. Heavy rains erased footprints within minutes, providing both cover and danger. According to a fragment of an after-action report from the 43rd Infantry Division, one commanding officer wrote, "We rely entirely on these scouts. They see what our men cannot afford to stumble into." The OSS team carried only the essentials: folded maps sealed in oilcloth, a compact SR-694 radio set, rations for 5 days, and a waterproof case containing reconnaissance sketches from previous overflights. Every step deeper into the jungle was a gamble between mission success and silence. Historical context underscores just how critical their mission was. Japanese forces on New Georgia had fortified positions with interlocking fields of fire, concealed mortar pits, and improvised coastal watch posts manned by veterans of the Guadalcanal defense. For the Allies, knowing the precise location of Japanese artillery was the difference between a disastrous landing and a controlled beachhead. OSS scouts were often the only ones who could provide such intel. Still, documents from this period reveal how little oversight these missions received. A surviving OSS logistics memo notes only, "Team dispatched July 14th. Radio check weekly unless compromised." It was the kind of instruction that now reads as chillingly vague. The team's final radio transmission, recorded by a Marine signal detachment, was brief: "Reached inlet. Movement inland, battery likely relocating." And then, after a short burst of static, a final note: "Monitoring. Will signal tonight." The message arrived at 1812 hours. No follow-up transmission came that night, or the night after. A patrol from the 169th Infantry Regiment attempted to reach the supposed position of the OSS team 3 days later but found no trace of a campsite, no abandoned gear, no footprints in the mud, only a scattering of cigarette butts typical of both American and Japanese troops. Even the indigenous scouts who assisted U.S. forces could provide no definitive leads. The deeper historians examine the files, the more questions arise. Japanese operational records captured after the war make no mention of any captured American reconnaissance personnel in the area. U.S. Naval Intelligence Archives reference the team only twice, first in a deployment order, then in a short, almost reluctant notation under unresolved field losses. No court-martial followed, no inquiry was opened, and no family received specific details beyond the standard "missing in action" telegrams. Modern analysts argue that the disappearance demonstrates both the importance and the vulnerability of early Allied reconnaissance efforts in the Pacific. Today's intelligence doctrine emphasizes redundant communication channels, extraction planning, and satellite-supported mapping, luxuries the 1943 team could never have imagined. Their story offers a sober reflection. Even the most skilled operatives, equipped with grit and purpose, walked blind into landscapes where a single misstep could erase their existence. Yet the greatest tension lies not in what is known, but in what remains hidden. Why did the team's final message mention movement inland, yet provide no coordinates? Why did subsequent patrols find no signs of struggle, equipment, or bodies? And why do the surviving documents appear so intentionally sparse, as if key pages were removed long before historians ever gained access? These questions linger at the edges of the archival record, hinting at gaps that may never be fully bridged. What we are left with is a silence, a void in the timeline of the New Georgia campaign where 4 men vanished without explanation. And as we transition to the next case, that silence becomes a reminder. In the Pacific War, some losses did not happen on the battlefield, but in the uncharted shadows between intelligence and uncertainty. In late 1944, as the Allied advance in Italy strained German logistics and forced the Wehrmacht to funnel supplies northward, the U.S. Army Air Forces relied heavily on photo reconnaissance units to understand the enemy's shifting defenses. Among these was a small, specialized detachment flying out of Gisenacchia Airfield in Corsica. Their planes, light, fast, stripped-down variants of the P-38 Lightning known as F-5s, were essential tools in the effort to map German rail networks feeding the Gothic Line. But one detachment's disappearance, on a mission that should have taken less than 3 hours, left behind a trail of wreckage and questions that historians are still unable to answer with certainty. The hook of this story lies in the paradox of aerial reconnaissance in Italy. The aircraft were some of the most advanced in the world, yet the mountains they crossed were among the most unforgiving on Earth. The mission in question launched on October 27, 1944. Its purpose was precise: fly north over the Apennines, sweep across the Bologna-Medina rail junction at low altitude, and photograph the lines believed to be carrying the last major German reinforcements into northern Italy. The Gothic Line defensive belt was faltering, and any intelligence on enemy movement was invaluable to both U.S. Fifth Army planners and the British Eighth Army fighting on its flanks. The struggle the aircrew faced was not merely the enemy's anti-aircraft fire, but the elements themselves. Autumn storms had begun sweeping across the Apennines, blanketing peaks in cloud and fog so dense that even seasoned pilots lost all sense of horizon. The F-5's cameras needed steady flight paths and altitude consistency, forcing pilots to fly dangerously low through valleys threaded with enemy gun positions. A surviving operations briefing notes, expect heavy cloud bank above 4,000 feet. If anti-aircraft fire encountered, maintain course, mission priority supersedes evasive action. It was the kind of order that revealed both the importance and the peril of the mission. Historical insight into the mission comes through a diary entry from Lieutenant Arlen Mercer, an F-5 pilot stationed in Corsica. You feel like a ghost on these flights. No guns, no armor. The only offense is speed. If they see you, you're already dead. Mercer's words capture the essence of reconnaissance flying, an act of daring that depended entirely on being unseen. That October morning, the detachment consisted of 2 aircraft. One lead, one wingman. Both carried Fairchild K-17 cameras. Both were veteran crews familiar with the route. And both vanished without sending a distress call. The reveal came days later in scattered fragments. After the aircraft failed to return, search and rescue teams flying B-25 Mitchells combed the Apennines but were hindered by weather so severe that visibility dropped to less than a mile. In November, Italian partisans reported hearing a twin-engine aircraft struggling low through cloud before a sharp, metallic impact echoed through the valley. When Allied intelligence investigated, they found a debris field, small, scattered, and oddly incomplete. Pieces of aluminum skin, a section of tail assembly and twisted camera gear lay among the rocks. But the fragments did not conclusively belong to a single aircraft. And more troubling, no remains of either crew were ever located. German records from the 16th SS Panzergrenadier Division, stationed near the same region, report no shoot-downs on that date. Luftwaffe flak batteries logged no confirmed hits along the detachment's intended flight path. A translated entry from a German ordnance officer observes simply, visibility extremely poor. No aerial activity detected. This contradiction between eyewitness sound reports, scattered wreckage, and the complete absence of enemy engagement has fueled decades of speculation. Modern aviation historians propose multiple explanations. One theory suggests the aircraft may have collided with a ridge concealed by cloud, leading the second aircraft to crash while attempting to follow or investigate. Another possibility involves structural failure. The F-5's lightweight frame, modified to carry additional cameras, sometimes exhibited stress issues during rapid altitude changes. Yet these theories fail to explain why the wreckage was spread across multiple valleys, or why only small fragments were found. Some researchers argue that heavy post-crash scavenging by locals or occupying forces could account for the missing pieces, though no partisan accounts support this. The application for modern aerial reconnaissance is clear: redundancy saves lives. Today's surveillance flights rely on satellite uplinks, real-time communication, and overlapping coverage. But in 1944, 2 aircraft flying alone over hostile, storm-covered mountains represented the height of available technology and an enormous risk. Their disappearance underscores how easily missions could vanish into the folds of terrain and weather. The part closes on quiet tension. Decades after the war, hikers in the Apennines continue to find occasional fragments of wartime aircraft, an aluminum bracket, a twisted panel, a piece of camera lens. None have been definitively linked to the missing detachment. The absence of records, remains, or a clear crash site leaves the story suspended in uncertainty. And as historians turn to the next case, an intelligence patrol lost in the frozen fjords of Norway, the mystery only deepens. In February 1943, while much of the world closely followed the fierce fighting in North Africa and the Atlantic, a quieter, more covert struggle was unfolding in German-occupied Norway. This was a theater defined not by sweeping offensives but by shadows, by intelligence patrols operating in frozen silence, gathering information that could shape naval strategy across the North Atlantic. Among these missions was a joint British-American reconnaissance patrol inserted into the rugged terrain near Trondheim. Their objective was simple in principle but perilous in execution: monitor U-boat traffic moving through the fjords and report any sign of new German deployments. Their disappearance remains one of the most enigmatic intelligence losses of the war. The hook lies in the geography itself. Norway's fjords, carved by glaciers over millennia, formed natural fortresses, vast walls of ice and stone plunging into black, frigid water. German forces exploited these geological defenses with ruthless efficiency. U-boats anchored beneath overhanging cliffs, moored in coves shielded from air attack, and camouflaged under netting interwoven with pine branches. Against these defenses, the Allies deployed one of their most discreet tools: small reconnaissance patrols trained to live off the land, avoid detection, and send coded updates via portable radio. The struggle began from the moment the team landed. The patrol consisted of 5 men, 3 from the British Special Operations Executive, SOE, 1 American OSS signal specialist, and a Norwegian liaison familiar with the region. They arrived by night under the cover of a Royal Navy submarine, the HMS Tribune, slipping ashore by collapsible dinghy near Agdenes Peninsula. From there, their mission required them to move inland through dense forests and snowy ridges, establishing observation posts overlooking the approaches to Trondheim harbor. But the weather was already turning against them. February in central Norway is unforgiving. Temperatures routinely drop below -15 degrees Celsius, winds howl off the fjords with cutting ferocity, and daylight is fleeting. Historical context reveals just how vital their mission was. By early 1943, Allied codebreakers had grown increasingly concerned about Germany's deployment patterns in Norway. Ultra-decrypts hinted at increased U-boat presence near Trondheim, suggesting a possible shift in Atlantic strategy. The fjord's depth allowed submarines to remain nearly impossible to detect while being resupplied. If Germany intended to reinforce its naval operations through Norway, the Allies needed confirmation, and this small patrol was tasked with providing it. A surviving fragment of a mission briefing from SOE Section D states, "Patrol is to remain unseen. Engagement is not authorized. Observation only. Extraction contingent on confirmation of naval activity." These simple lines underscored the isolation of their assignment. They were to be eyes and ears, never a fighting force. Insight into their experience comes from a diary page attributed to the Norwegian liaison, preserved in a post-war resistance archive. "Cold steals the strength from our hands. Each ridge promises a sight line, but the fog returns like a curtain. 3 days and still no clear view of the harbor." The terrain forced them to relocate multiple times, shifting between makeshift shelters, sometimes nothing more than pine branch lean-tos packed with snow to mask their heat signatures. The reveal came with their final coded transmission, recorded on February 17, 1943. The message, sent via a short-burst cipher designed to avoid German radio triangulation, read, "Observation compromised. Unexpected movement in the fjord. Relocating to secondary position." What unexpected movement referred to remains unknown. Intelligence analysts have theorized it could have been a German minesweeper, a spotter patrol, or even a civilian vessel forced into the area by weather. In any case, the patrol's communication ended abruptly. No scheduled check-ins followed. Attempts to locate the team began weeks later. Severe weather delayed air reconnaissance, while German patrols increased activity along the coast after the Allies conducted a separate sabotage operation against a heavy water facility further south. Norwegian resistance groups searched discreetly, but all they found were footprints fading into snow near Hitra Island and a torn scrap of canvas consistent with British military rucksacks. No bodies. No radios. No equipment caches. German war diaries from the Trondheim Naval District make no mention of captured Allied operatives during this period. Post-war interrogations of Kriegsmarine officers similarly yielded nothing. However, a 1946 resistance report references rumors of an attempted extraction. A fishing vessel allegedly signaled Allied forces offshore on the night of February 22 but was fired upon by coastal sentries, forcing it to flee. No SOE or OSS files confirm this, yet its timing aligns with the patrol's intended extraction window. Modern researchers studying the case note how fleeting intelligence missions could be in such environments. Avalanches, sudden storms, or thin ice along fjord edges could wipe out any trace of a small team. Others wonder if the patrol may have been forced to scatter after detection, leaving them vulnerable to exposure, a silent, deadly enemy in Norwegian winters. The closing tension rests on what might have been the patrol's final discovery. In a supplementary British naval report filed months later, a single line stands out. Increased U-boat traffic noted entering Trondheim late February. Source unconfirmed. If the patrol did witness significant enemy movement, they never had the chance to fully report it. Their final message, unexpected movement in the fjord, remains the last thread connecting their fate to the shadowed expanse of Norway's wartime coastline. As we move toward the next case, a U.S. Navy reconnaissance team deployed from submarine operations in the Pacific, the sense persists that many intelligence missions were swallowed not by battle, but by the landscapes in which they operated. In the silent reaches of the Western Pacific, where the vast ocean hid more secrets than any battlefield map could reveal, reconnaissance missions often unfolded in the most precarious of circumstances. Among these was the 1944 disappearance of a U.S. Navy shore party reconnaissance team deployed from the submarine USS Gato. Their orders were clear: land on Yap Island under cover of darkness, verify reports of new Japanese troop arrivals and return before dawn. Yet in a theater defined by shifting tides, impenetrable jungles, and a ruthless enemy determined to defend every inch of their island bastions, clarity often dissolved into uncertainty. The hook in this story emerges from the mission's inception. By mid-1944, the U.S. Navy had shifted its strategic focus toward the Marianas, preparing for the critical offensives on Saipan, Tinian, and Guam. But intelligence from intercepted Japanese communications, many partially decrypted by Station Hypo, hinted that the garrisons on Yap, though not targets for immediate invasion, were receiving reinforcements. These reinforcements, if directed toward the Marianas, could threaten U.S. amphibious operations. Thus, the Navy authorized a reconnaissance mission involving 4 sailors trained in hydrographic surveys and coastal observation. They were to determine whether new coastal batteries or troop emplacements had been erected along Yap's western shore. Their struggle began before they reached land. USS Gato, operating under conditions of strict radio silence, surfaced 12 miles west of Yap on July 9, 1944. The moon was only a sliver, providing limited illumination for the rubber raft that carried the shore team. Swells pushed against them as they paddled toward the dark silhouette of the island. According to the submarine's patrol log, the sea was moderately rough with intermittent rain squalls, a detail that would later add to the mission's uncertainty. The team carried only essential equipment: a short-range radio transmitter, waterproof notebooks, wire cutters, a small compass, and a single M3 submachine gun, a weapon rarely issued to recon teams but included due to rumors of increased Japanese patrols near the landing site. Historical context deepens the sense of danger they faced. Yap, though bypassed during the island-hopping strategy, remained heavily fortified. Reports later obtained from Japanese sources indicated that elements of the 49th Independent Mixed Brigade had arrived in mid-1944, reinforcing existing garrisons from the 1st Special Base Force. Surveillance by U.S. aircraft had been inconclusive. Cloud cover and anti-aircraft fire often obscured key defensive positions. The submarine reconnaissance team was considered the best method for obtaining confirmation. The team reached shore shortly before midnight. According to a surviving fragment of Gato's deck log, the submarine was to wait submerged offshore and resurface at 0400 to retrieve them. But the shore party's radio, designed to transmit short encoded bursts, sent only one message: landed. Moving inland. No patrols observed. After that, silence. Insight into operations of this type comes from later interviews with surviving submarine captains who ran similar missions. They described how even the smallest miscalculation, landing slightly off target, encountering an unexpected patrol, or misreading the tide could doom a team. One captain recalled, "The island could swallow you in an instant. You might land on what looks like an empty beach, but by dawn it becomes a death trap." For this mission, ambiguities mounted quickly. When Gato resurfaced at the designated extraction time, There was no signal, no flashlight beacon, no radio transmission, no sign of movement on the beach. The submarine searched the shoreline for nearly an hour, risking detection as dawn approached. At 0447, the commanding officer recorded the difficult decision: unable to re-establish contact. Departing area per orders. The mission had already gone farther than protocol allowed. The reveal came months later after Japan's surrender. Allied intelligence officers examined thousands of pages of Japanese military records from YAP, including rosters of POWs and interrogation transcripts from officers stationed on the island. None mentioned the capture of American reconnaissance personnel. Japanese daily logs from the 1st Special Base Force reported no unusual encounters, no skirmishes, and no unidentified landings on the night of July 9th. The absence of any such record has long puzzled naval historians. One modern theory suggests the team may have drifted south of their intended landing zone, coming ashore near a concealed Japanese listening post. Another posits that a sudden change in tide could have swept their raft against the reef, forcing them to swim ashore and possibly losing their equipment in the process. Exposure, capture, or ambush remain possibilities, but so too does accidental drowning during extraction. Without concrete evidence, each scenario remains speculative. A reflection on modern reconnaissance underscores how far intelligence operations have evolved. Today, satellite imagery, drones, and advanced sensors eliminate the need for such high-risk landings. Yet these technological tools owe their existence to the sacrifices and unknown outcomes of the early reconnaissance pioneers who ventured into darkness with little more than courage and a radio. The close of this chapter rests in the unanswered questions. What did the team see after moving inland? Why was their radio silent after the initial transmission? And were their final moments violent, or simply swallowed by the vastness of the Pacific and the unforgiving shores of Yap? With no remains, no wreckage, and no enemy record, their disappearance stands as one of the Pacific War's enduring mysteries. The next part takes us deeper into another unforgiving landscape, the jungles of Burma, where an OSS Detachment 101 scout group met its own inexplicable end. By 1944, the dense jungles and razorback ridges of northern Burma had become a proving ground for one of the most effective and least conventional intelligence units of the Second World War. OSS Detachment 101. Their mission was to infiltrate Japanese-held territory, coordinate with catching guerrillas, sabotage supply lines, and gather critical reconnaissance for the Allied forces advancing in the China, Burma, India theater. Yet for all their success, the terrain remained unforgiving, the enemy relentless, and the margin for error razor-thin. It was in this harsh environment that one of Detachment 101 scout teams vanished without a trace, leaving behind only a series of confused radio transmissions and a mystery that endures to this day. The hook begins with the very nature of Detachment 101's operations. Unlike other Allied units, the scouts had no fixed base, no predictable routes, and often no direct support beyond what the catch and resistance could provide. Their strength came from stealth and local trust. As one officer famously wrote in a field report, "Our men travel paths that do not exist, guided by people who do not officially fight, to find targets the enemy denies are there." These scouts were the invisible eyes of the Northern Combat Area Command, and their intelligence shaped entire offensives. In late August 1944, as monsoon rains pounded the Hukong Valley, a four-man scout team, 2 OSS operatives and 2 catching guides, was sent east of the Cuman Range. Their assignment was deceptively straightforward. Verify Japanese troop movements withdrawing from Myakina after the fall of the city to Allied forces. The Japanese 18th Division, exhausted but still lethal, was believed to be retreating through narrow trails that snaked along the valley floor. If they were regrouping for a counterattack, the Allies needed to know immediately. The struggle emerged almost as soon as the team moved beyond known safe zones. The monsoon had turned the jungle into an ever-shifting maze of mud, swollen rivers, and landslides. Leeches clung to skin like needles. Visibility dropped to mere meters in the thick mist. One surviving catch-in interview from 1953 described these conditions simply: "Rain eats the trail. You walk on water, not earth." The team carried standard scout gear, 2 M1 carbines, machetes, a small SER 694 radio set, a waterproof packet of rice, and coded message sheets. Every ounce mattered. Historical insight shows that conditions during this period were especially perilous. Japanese units retreating from Myakina were desperate, low on supplies, and increasingly reliant on ambush tactics. Patrols often reported hearing enemy soldiers long before they saw them, sometimes singing to keep their spirits up, other times moving in eerie silence. OSS files reflect growing concern about Japanese troops blending into refugee columns or doubling back to strike scouting parties. The jungle itself became a stage of constant uncertainty. On September 3, 1944, the team sent its first coded transmission. Movement confirmed. 2 columns. Heavy packs. Possible reposition. Analysts interpreted this as evidence of a Japanese fallback designed to delay U.S. and Chinese forces. But the message did not specify direction or numbers, an omission out of character for the team's normally meticulous reporting. A second brief signal followed later that afternoon, shifting to Hill Village. Will observe overnight. The village's name was partially garbled in the rain-distorted code but resembled Nanqui, one of several small settlements scattered along the valley's eastern ridges. Then came the final transmission. Sent at 2040 hours, it consisted of only 6 chilling words: unexpected enemy presence. Breaking position now. Operators noted the sudden, urgent tone, unusual for scouts trained to remain calm even under fire. Several attempts to raise the team afterward were met with silence. The reveal unfolded in the days that followed. A larger OSS Kachin patrol was dispatched to trace the missing team's route, but the monsoon erased nearly all sign of passage. They found a broken tree branch, a piece of cloth snagged on thorns, and footprints dissolving into mud. At the edge of a ravine, they discovered what may have been an abandoned cooking site, but whether it belonged to the lost scouts, local villagers, or Japanese stragglers, no one could say. The hill village thought to be their destination had been evacuated weeks earlier. Its bamboo huts stood empty, half-collapsed, and overtaken by vines. Japanese records captured after the war were equally inconclusive. None mentioned captured OSS personnel in the Hukong Valley during this period. The nearest logged enemy engagement occurred several miles south, involving Chinese forces, not a small recon element. One report from a Japanese officer noted increased guerrilla disturbance, but lacked detail. Even decades later, no definitive link was established. Modern reflection suggests several possibilities. The team may have encountered a Japanese rearguard larger than expected. They could have missed their extraction window and succumbed to exposure. They might have split up during an ambush, with each member unable to regroup in the storm. Or they may have stumbled upon a temporarily abandoned trail only to meet a counter-patrol returning unexpectedly. The Kachin guides who later reviewed the disappearance believed the terrain itself held the answer. In monsoon, one said, the jungle takes without giving back. The chapter closes with a haunting truth. In the mountains and valleys of northern Burma, even well-trained scouts backed by local expertise could vanish in an instant. The OSS team's final radio message, unexpected enemy presence, remains the last trace of their mission. What they saw, who they encountered, and how they met their fate are answers left buried beneath decades of monsoon rains. Our final case brings us full circle, back to the Pacific, where yet another reconnaissance unit slipped beyond the margins of recorded history. In the closing months of 1944, as American forces tightened their grip across the vast Pacific, a little-known chapter unfolded far from the major battlefields, a chapter involving a classified reconnaissance group whose disappearance remains one of the war's most haunting unresolved cases. These were members of a U.S. Army Intelligence and Reconnaissance Detachment operating under the umbrella of the 6th Army, assigned to probe the labyrinth of islands, channels, and volcanic ridges stretching across the central Philippines. Their task: verify Japanese troop withdrawals following the Leyte campaign and identify staging areas for potential counteroffensives. What began as a routine field mission ended in a silence that no after-action report could explain. The hook lies in the detachment's formation. In late 1944, the Pacific Front was in a state of transition. With the liberation of Leyte underway, U.S. planners anticipated fierce Japanese resistance on Luzon and Mindanao. Intelligence suggested that several Japanese naval and army units were repositioning through the central archipelago, slipping between islands using night movement and fishing vessels. To confirm these movements, small reconnaissance parties, often 4 to 6 men, were inserted ahead of advancing forces to map trails, assess enemy strength, and radio back strategic data. The detachment assigned to the Camotes Sea region was one such team. Their struggle began on November 28, 1944, when the unit, 3 Army scouts and 2 Filipino guerrilla guides, landed on Passagen Island under the cover of heavy cloud and intermittent monsoon rain. Their landing craft, operated by a naval beach party, withdrew immediately to avoid drawing attention from Japanese patrols rumored to be operating nearby. The team carried only what they could move quickly with: a compact SR-300 radio, machetes, an M1 carbine and Thompson submachine gun, waterproof rations, and paper map overlays showing suspected Japanese routes. The terrain ahead of them was a mixture of steep volcanic slopes, dense banana groves, and a maze of footpaths where visibility narrowed to mere feet. Historical context shows just how critical the mission was. The U.S. Sixth Army feared that Japanese forces were funneling supplies and troops from Cebu to Leyte in a last-ditch attempt to slow the American advance. The Camotes Islands, small, lightly populated, and strategically wedged between these major landmasses, were believed to be staging areas. But aerial reconnaissance was unreliable. Cloud cover, smoke from burning fields, and Japanese camouflage techniques made it nearly impossible to identify true positions from the air. Eyes on the ground were essential. Insight into the team's initial progress comes from the two messages they managed to send. The first, transmitted just after dawn on November 29th, read, "No major troop presence on western shore. Tracing inland movement toward Ridge Path." Analysts interpreted this as confirmation that the Japanese were not massing on Pasagen's coast, which eased immediate concerns of a counter-landing. A second transmission followed late that evening. Local reports indicate patrols from neighboring island, investigating possible crossing point. The mention of local reports suggests that the team had contacted villagers, standard practice in joint U.S. guerrilla operations, but the message lacked details normally included in reconnaissance reporting. Then came the final transmission on November 30th at 0122 hours. It lasted only 9 seconds, cut off by static, multiple signals, unsure origin. Withdrawing north slope. Operators noted the unusual wording. Multiple signals could refer to radio interference, torchlight patterns, or even coded visual cues used by Japanese patrols. No further messages followed. The reveal came when a larger guerrilla contingent attempted to meet the team at a prearranged rendezvous point near the northern ridge. They found nothing, no gear, no camp traces, no footprints, only heavy rain that had washed the slopes clean. A mangled section of underbrush nearby suggested someone had moved quickly downslope, but whether it belonged to the missing scouts or a Japanese patrol could not be determined. When American forces secured the region weeks later, they conducted a formal search. The result was the same: nothing. Captured Japanese records offered no clarity. Logs from the 102nd Division, active in nearby Cebu, reported no engagements in the Camotes Sea region that week. Naval patrol notes showed no landings or confrontations. Even civilian testimony gathered in 1945 failed to yield answers. Some islanders recalled hearing distant shouting in the early hours of November 30th. Others claimed to have seen unusual lantern movements near the ridge. None could confirm who or what was involved. Modern analysis suggests several possibilities. The team may have been caught between two Japanese patrols moving from opposite directions. They might have stumbled into a concealed lookout post or misinterpreted guerrilla signals, leading to fatal confusion. Some historians argue that the final radio message hints at electronic interference, a rare but not impossible occurrence in the island's volcanic terrain. Others believe the team attempted to withdraw along a cliffside path that collapsed during the storm. Reflection cast their story in a larger light. The Pacific War was filled with small reconnaissance missions that operated in the margins, beyond clear battle lines, relying on locals and navigating landscapes where a single wrong turn erased all trace. These teams shaped operational decisions that affected thousands, yet their own fates sometimes vanished into the folds of geography and time. The closing tension lingers in the uncertainty. The detachment's final words, multiple signals, remain one of the most debated fragments of reconnaissance reporting from the Pacific Theater. What they heard or saw in those final minutes remains locked within the rain-soaked slopes of Pasagen Island, an island that has long since returned to peace but never surrendered its wartime secrets. Thus ends the final case: 5 reconnaissance teams, 5 missions, and 5 silences that continue to echo through the historical record. Their stories remain reminders that even in a war defined by massive armies and sweeping operations, the smallest units sometimes walk the most dangerous paths of all.